This is a journey into a world of mystery and deceit, a fantastical place full of UFOs, strange encounters, and stories of alien abduction. The shadow defense industry, worth billions of dollars but hidden from public view. Now, more people than ever believe in UFOs. I want to know what really has been flying through our airspace. Do these sightings, or do they hold the clues to something more mysterious? My plan is to trace the phenomenon through each decade, from early sightings of UFOs during the Second World War to the mass reports of alien abductions that swept America in the 80s and 90s, to the Roswell incident and the Zamora sighting, to try to answer the question, are UFOs real? People send me pictures like these every week. A picture taken by a Canadian Air Force pilot on a military exercise. And what it shows is indeed quite startling. I've seen many pictures like this, all of them taken by aircrew, people who are trained to record data. But these pictures resonate with me because the matter of who you share airspace with when you're traveling at twice the speed of sound really is a matter of life and death. The history of UFO sightings is not a long one, but it's a bit longer than most people suspect. To start to make sense of UFOs, you must go back 63 years. To the Second World War and these men, and what some of them saw in the night skies over Europe. Allied aircrews described strange glowing balls of light that tracked their aircraft, and even coined a name for them, Foo Fighters. This is one of the first recorded reports of a UFO sighting.
Was that light on red too?
We were cruising at 7,000 feet when we discovered we had company. An orange-coloured light off the port wing. At first I thought it was tracer flak, but discounted this when I saw how slowly and controlled it was moving.
What the hell is it?
It seemed to be playing with Red 2, diving around the fuselage. Suddenly, it turned starboard and headed straight for us. I found it hard to make other members of the squadron believe me, but the following night, one of the squadron flight commanders had a similar experience, with a green light.
It's gone, it's gone, it's gone!
A handful of Foo Fighters sightings could be dismissed as pilot error, but there were hundreds, if not thousands. Could they really just be the hallucinations of tired or terrified men? I've decided to find out more about these strange balls of fire.
Flying saucers in the style that we would appreciate today. And there's a problem of reporting them. We're fearful that they get grounded for lack of moral fibre, for inventing things to get them grounded, some form of psychological problem. First, the RAF.
But over the skies of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., they caused such panic that President Truman was forced to speak about them publicly. In a few short years, UFOs had reached the highest office in the land.
Oh yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things, if I'm not mistaken.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris.
America was about to go saucer crazy.
To the best of our knowledge, my wife and I are the only ones left alive.
In 1952, a series of strange lights were seen over Capitol Hill. UFOs had arrived in the political heartland of America, causing mass panic.
In the midst of this big national flap, radar sets in the Washington, D.C. area, which picked up targets that were traveling around in restricted airspace over the Capitol.
This couldn't be ignored. It had all the makings of a national emergency. Whether it was alien visitors or, as many in the military suspected, advanced Soviet spy technology, the Air Force needed to act fast. Jets were launched against the UFOs, and the military made sure their actions made headline news. The intention was to reassure the public, and it might have worked, but for the fact the following weekend, the 19th of July, the UFOs were sighted again. 1,000 people called in reports, including staff from President Truman's office. The government had to be seen to act. This man, General Sanford of the United States Air Force, was given the job of reassuring the nation and explaining to people what they'd seen.
In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them.
The man at the forefront of Blue Book's investigations was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek was employed by the Air Force. He interviewed thousands of witnesses and collated some of the public's most bizarre encounters.
Have you ever seen a meteor with headlights?
No, I've never seen a meteor with headlights. But one might see a meteor that looked like it had headlights.
Well,
However,
apparently I do not drink, and this had some kind of light on the back
all
of it.
right, good, fine.
Hynek was a skeptic. During the course of his investigations, he was able to attribute many of the sightings to natural phenomena.
All of them saying that they saw it predominantly in an eastern direction. Now, if it had been extremely close to any one of them, it could not have been seen to the east by all the people. And observers west of Elgin, as far
But
west
Project
as
Blue
far
Book
west
had
as
severe
the-
limitations. No military sightings were included in its pages. Instead, they were immediately classified and buried deep in the files of the Pentagon. Much to Hynek's frustration, because reports by Air Force pilots, of which there were many, intrigued him very much. But now we can tell the story of one such sighting for the very first time. It involves the early reconnaissance missions by the United States over the Soviet Union. Thomas Hanley was an RB-47 radar operator, one of the first Cold War spies in the sky.
When you're flying, one particular night, the aircraft commander saw a bright light coming towards us. So we played cat and mouse with it, whatever it was, for an hour anyhow. But the ground was recording it, and they would lose it too. It was performing not maneuverable. I'm certain something different was out there, but I have no idea what it was.
And then it went into a small cloud. Again, we spotted it as it came out of the cloud, and very shortly after that, it quickly disappeared.
Public belief in UFOs seemed to be working, and the U-2's development and deployment was hidden behind a smokescreen of disinformation.
It was a flying object of some sort that could hover, and such as I've never seen before.
Right here is where this flying saucer, this UFO, landed. Right here about where I'm standing. And it was a big, huge...
But back in America, the UFO story was about to enter a new phase. a reliable witness reported a clear sighting of a UFO and its alien occupants. The first convincing close encounter of the third kind. On the 24th of April 1964, America experienced its first credible close encounter of the third kind. Officer Lonnie Zamora was driving along a quiet stretch of road skirting the edge of the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico.
What the hell was that?
Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of something strange in the sky.
Whoa.
He left the road and set off for the desert, following the craft. He caught sight of a shiny object, now landed, about 200 yards away. As he looked over, he saw two figures in white coveralls, close to what looked like a flying saucer. Suddenly, without warning, the craft took off and headed straight for him. And as quickly as it had arrived, it disappeared off into the distance at high speed. This statement by Lonnie Zamora. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found an impression in the soil, surrounded by burnt brushwood. Zamora was so distraught that he insisted on seeing a priest before handing in his report.
A man called Robin Peck, who was returning home to this little village quite late at night, after midnight, and his light suddenly failed and his engine started misfiring. He felt this, what he described as like a wave of static electricity. And he looked around at about 200 feet from the ground with what he described as a huge inverted mushroom, a brilliant blue, ice blue colour. Suddenly, inexplicably, it just disappeared, almost in the blink of an eye, towards Norwich, leaving this glow in the sky. He was so shaken.
But it wasn't so much American spy planes that were worrying the Russians. There was something else in the skies that was causing them alarm. An incident over the small town of Petrozavodsk would trigger the largest study of UFOs on the face of the Earth. Russia's X-Files had begun. On September the 20th, 1977, high over the Russian town of Petrozavodsk, a group of soldiers were on routine maneuvers. Suddenly, a bright star appeared radiating pulsating beams of light. The object lingered over the town like a huge jellyfish. After a few minutes, it wrapped into a bright half disk and shot off. The observations continued every night for 13 years. No other nation has conducted such a long and thorough research program into unidentified flying objects. But as Sokolov tells me, the evidence was inconclusive.
I would like to say that it is
And as Dr. Platov explained,
stealth was an enormous breakthrough, and nobody out in the wider world really believed it was possible. Nobody could even imagine that it was possible to do that.
the Americans had won the technological race. By waging a campaign of disinformation on their own people with the UFO cover story, the CIA were able to hide the existence of stealth from Soviet surveillance for 10 years. But stealth couldn't begin to explain the series of alleged alien encounters which were about to shock the American Southwest.
The rectum had been partially removed. The eyes were bulging out.
I really did believe something strange was going on. We had one up north where we believed the animal was paralyzed and was alive when it was being mutilated.
These horrific events took place all over the plains of New Mexico, an area that had been witnessing UFO sightings continuously since the 1940s.
And the reproductive tract also had been removed. The organs that were removed precisely without spilling.
Many of the ranchers believed the cattle mutilations were the result of UFOs, that aliens were dissecting the animals for experimentation.
Usually when you find an animal that dies of...
But for Gomez, there were other clues.
We saw this light kind of...
Long, hard day's work, and we were headed home. We'd worked late that night, so it was starting to get dark. And as we were driving down this rough track there, we saw light coming through the trees.
What the hell is that?
Travis, man, what the hell are you doing? Come back! Travis!
Back then, you know, I was a kind of a wild sort of a guy. You know, I was showing off, you know. It was stupid. The closer I got to, you know, and it wasn't going anywhere, and I was, you know, thinking about how food. And right at that instant, something hit me. Next thing I knew, I was regaining consciousness, but I was in a lot of pain. I saw these forms over me, and when I finally got it into focus, I could see this creature looking at me, and I just flipped out.
Walton reappeared, dazed and confused.
I didn't know how much time had gone by. I had enough trouble just dealing with the reality of this incredible thing that had happened.
Travis's story seems incredible, but it's only one of many such tales. Does the weight of evidence add up to a believable pattern of abduction? In order to understand the nature of the contact experience in the 1980s, we need to look at the first reported cases back in the 1950s.
They come here to commune with outer space.
To start the message now, group, here we go. We are your friends. We are your friends. Please contact us.
Contactees were a group of people who claimed they'd been visited by human-like aliens from planets such as Venus and Saturn. Unlike Travis Walton's aliens, these visitors were reputed to be benign.
We are your friends.
Living in the shadow of the arms race, contactees preached peace towards all species, whether alien or terrestrial, and campaigned for disarmament. Of course, disinformation is a factor behind tales of UFO sightings and alien contact. But I also think there's something else. Our need to believe. Anthropologist Charles Ziegler has studied many abductee testimonies. The chief skeptic of all, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who investigated UFOs for the US military, also became a believer. It was Hynek's interviews and expertise that formed the basis of the 1977 film Close Encounters, directed by Steven Spielberg.
I think that we're all interested in having in the re-enchantment of the universe. We want to feel that there are transcendent things out there that we're not aware of.
Whether it's Allied pilots buzzed by strange balls of fire in 1942, or the Roswell incident 5 years later, there is a... For me, what is so striking about Roswell is that it's the first good example of an officially sanctioned UFO disinformation exercise. It showed the CIA that UFOs could provide perfect cover for their Cold War activities. It didn't take much for the CIA to spin the extraterrestrial story into the hearts and minds of the American public. And once it was there, all manner of experimental technology could, if it was spotted, be put down to the UFO phenomenon. The sightings of UFO Hill in 1952 are still baffling, and Tom Hanley's aerial encounter remains as testimony to the possibility we are not alone. What is certain is that real-world UFOs, the man-made ones, continue to develop. Recently, a series of sonic booms were heard exploding across California and Nevada. Something was in the sky that could be heard and felt, but not seen. Some informed observers, and I'm one of them, believe it was an aircraft traveling at several thousand miles per hour, a secret project known as Aurora.